Hey guys, my name is Metalsmith and welcome back, of course, to another Mario Kart Tour video. As of late, Mario Kart Tour has been getting many updates that have completely changed the game, with a couple of major ones revolving around items. We all know how the items are in Mario Kart Tour. Some of them can get you from the bottom spots to the top spots, some of them are good for scoring points, and others are unfortunately not all that great. And that's what drove me into making this video. I will be, once again, counting down the top 5 worst items in Mario Kart Tour, with the goal of maybe educating newer players on deciding which Spotlight driver to buy, for example. Now, before we begin, I like to point out that I've already made a list counting down the top 5 worst items back in May of 2021, which was quite a while ago. If you want to rewatch that video before you watch this one, please take the given information with a grain of salt. This is an updated list on some of the worst items in Mario Kart Tour, after several large updates and more gained experience by myself. I thought this list could use a fresh new coat, so without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Number 5. Super Leaf. To kick things off, we have the Super Leaf, this item equips you with a Tanuki tail that will spin around you in a very quick succession. When it spins, it'll attack nearby drivers while also collecting any coins in the vicinity of its range. Although that doesn't sound too bad on paper, the problem arises when you use it at the wrong time. When the tail is spinning, your car basically has a mind of its own, and more often than not your combo will easily come to an end, and you won't get the maximum potential out of the item unless other drivers or coins are around you. When the spinning ends, the cart will fall flat on the road and you won't be able to charge mini turbos while the cart is still falling for a split second. I should also mention that if you happen to use a Super Leaf while charging a mini turbo, the Super Leaf animation will interrupt it, the mini turbo will not trigger, and you won't get any extra points for it. Also, it doesn't help that only 3 high-end drivers have this item, those being the 3 Tanuki drivers. There's also White Tanuki Mario, but he has a giant banana, so he doesn't count. But nonetheless, this means that the item doesn't get used much at the end of the day. Overall, the Super Leaf can be a decent replacement for the Boomerang Flower at least when used properly, but when used poorly, you'd be surprised how easy it is to lose your combo after just a single use. But because of its effectiveness around coins and other drivers, I'm only going to keep it low on the list. Number 4. Dash Ring. I must say, despite this item being on this list, it's a pretty unique one. When using the Dash Ring, you'll toss out 3 rings in front of you along the track, and you'll be able to pass through them to get a speed boost. However, this applies to the other drivers as well. Yeah, you heard that right. Other drivers can use your rings for a speed boost for themselves. So if you're not in the top spots, it might be difficult to catch up because of the speed boost that you're giving to your opponents. Not to mention that the rings themselves are massive and almost impossible to miss. Even bots have a hard time missing them. This item is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go much into detail with it, but if you're falling behind and you use the Dash Ring, you might end up helping other drivers whether you like it or not, which is why I'm putting it at the number 4 spot on this list. Number 3. Banana Barrels. And in the very middle of the list, we have the Banana Barrels. You arm your car with 2 barrels full of bananas, continuously shooting them out in front of you for a set amount of time. Despite the fact that you can get points for hitting other drivers, dodging your own bananas is a huge pain in the neck. And the controls don't help either, considering how jank they are. I mentioned in my last list that I personally think that the bananas should be shot backwards instead of forwards. That way, you'd still be able to make a minefield out of the track without having to go through the trouble of dodging your own bananas. I'll once again mention that we have a very little number of drivers who actually have this item, and we also haven't gotten one in quite some time. I suppose that the banana barrels wouldn't be too bad for someone with practice, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't still need to be careful. In the end, the banana barrels don't really get much use out of many players, nor is it a great item compared to other better ones, which is why they'll be sitting at the number 3 spot on this list. Number 2. Mushroom Cannon. Another self-explanatory item. It's a cannon that will continuously shoot out mushrooms for a set amount of time. You might be thinking this is essentially the same thing as the banana barrels. And, well, yeah, you're right. But what makes this item worse than the banana barrels is instead of shooting out bananas, it's obviously mushrooms. Like mentioned before with the Dash Ring, it's possible to help other drivers with a speed boost from the mushroom cannon. Now, even though the mushrooms are small and not as easy to drive over, you won't be able to help other players all the time, which is a good thing. But the other problem comes by angling the cannon itself. Personally, I find myself driving in a straight line when I have to use this item just so it's easier to pick up the mushrooms for myself. And honestly, that doesn't always work depending on the track. So, when not handled correctly, you'll either dish out mushrooms for the other drivers to take, or they'll end up flying off the track if you don't angle the cannon in the right direction, which is exactly why the mushroom cannon will be taking the number 2 spot on this list. Now, before we get into number 1, I would call these honorable mentions, but there's nothing really to be honored about for a top 5 worst list, but you get my point anyways, so let's roll with it. These are items that are just decent at the end of the day and didn't really make it onto the list. I'm gonna start with the capsule, where 3 blue and red pills surround your car and will bounce at other drivers when you throw at them. They kinda work like red shells, but it's basically red shells on acid. Yeah, I said that. They're easy to use, and they work pretty well. However, it's just one of those disappointing items. What I mean by this is that it's literally a pill for an item, therefore very limited to certain drivers. More specifically, doctor drivers. There are only 4 in the game, and each of them have the capsule as their item. So unless we see another doctor driver soon, this item will probably be forgotten sooner than later. Next up is the ice flower, where 3 balls of ice surround your cart until you tap the screen once to use them all at the same time. They'll freeze any opponent they hit, causing them to slide, as well as not being able to do anything. The problem here is specifically how slow the ice balls move when thrown. It's kinda hard not to include this item in this video when compared to the fire flower, which is a pretty good item by the way. If you want to hit someone with an ice ball at some point, your best bet will require you to get relatively close to another driver so you can either run into them or shoot the ice balls normally. The ice flower has potential, however, only when used in the right hands. And number 1, the bubble. Before anyone asks, yes, this item was number 1 on my last list, and it still deserves to be there. It briefly envelops your cart, protecting you from any sort of damage, but it will vanish upon actually taking the damage. Although you get a speed boost when you're actually in the bubble, it's really difficult to control, and you don't get that many points while you're in the bubble to begin with. In my last list, I mentioned that only 4 drivers had this item, and they were all normal rarity drivers. But since then, only 2 drivers were added to the game with this item, those being the Cheep Cheep Mii Racing Suit and the Lemmy Mii Racing Suit. And that's it. I don't even know how Nintendo can make an item worse than this. Like, I cannot express how much of a bad item this truly is. And not only that, but it's practically useless because of how many drivers have it. So again, I'm being dead serious when I say the bubble is the worst item in all of Mario Kart Tour! That was a little over the top, wasn't it? Look, I get it. Not every item is going to be perfect. Despite me making a list about how bad some of the items are, I've really come to realize that every item has a flaw to them. Even some of the better items that I included in my top 5 best items list that I remade a few months ago. If you haven't checked out that video, I'd highly recommend it for a boost of positivity, especially after watching this video here. But, to end it all, this list was mostly subjective to my tastes, so feel free to let me know in the comments if you'd make any changes to the list, or if you think a different item deserves a number 1 spot. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.